is approaching, and let's take a look at some of the last few big deadline deals. Ibaka, Cousins, Lou Will, and Nurkic exchanging hands in 2017. Kind of a light slate in 2016. Harris and Keefe on the move. In 2015 was crazy. I was just talking with our producer, Bert Bondi, about that. We were working together that day. Dragic, Jackson, Cantor, Garnett, Thomas, many others moved teams on that epic trade deadline of 2015. And we welcome you back to Game Time, presented by State Farm. Rick, Grant, and Stu. And the NBA trade deadline is a little more than a month away. In fact, Thursday, February 8th. So let's start by talking about teams who should make a move. Grant, who needs to be wheeling and dealing here over the next month?
Wow, I think the Washington Wizards in the Eastern Conference, you know, a team that they're 6 games back from first place in the 4th spot, but they're also seven games from being in the 7th spot in the East. And of course, for them, they don't have a great bench, although Mike Scott's been a great addition for them this year. But their power forward position, I know Markieff Morris was out for a while, had an injury, he's working his way back, but his efficiency hasn't been great. And for them to just take that next step, you know, to be able to compete with Cleveland, to compete, of course, with Boston, I feel like they need another player or two. The challenge is, what are you going to give up for to get that player? But as this team is, I just don't think they're good enough to get past the second round in the Eastern Conference.
So, Grant, do they need scoring? Do they need rebounding? You know what I mean? Where would you add to that Washington team?
I think scoring off the bench. I think you have another big, Gortat. Plays a lot of minutes, has great chemistry with Wall. Morris, when he gets back, hopefully into the kind of form that he was last year. But you need another big, I think, off the bench, and maybe some offensive scoring or shooting off the bench. Just, you know, so you don't have to play your main guys so many minutes and rely so heavily on them. And in the postseason, you need a bench. You know, you need guys who can, you know, your bench has to win a game for you in a big series. And that's just not happening right now with this team.
And we talked before the break about Russell Westbrook and in terms of the Thunder, and you mentioned bench scoring. There's not a lot of bench scoring going on with OKC. Are they another team that needs to make a move?
No question. You know, in the West, Oklahoma City, there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, both Melo and Paul George have player options this upcoming for next season. So they could be gone, and you have to go all in right now to win. So 5th seed right now, they kind of weathered the storm early, you know, went through some difficulties. They figured some things out. But, hey, at the end of the day, it's Houston, it's Golden State, throw San Antonio maybe into that conversation in the Western Conference eventually. Oklahoma City has to go for it now. And so, yes, if you can bring in anything and everything to sort of help with the bench. The bench has got to give them more. The bench, you got to have some scoring, some production off the bench, maybe another big as well. 2 teams that are similar, I think it's do or die. It's must win now for Oklahoma City. And if not, those guys may leave and you may be building around Steven Adams and Westbrook.
Stu, you've got a great resume. It includes head coaching, GMing, senior associate commissioner of the Big East. Let's tap into that GM experience right now. Who needs to make a move?
Well, I'm going to go the opposite direction because Grant talked about 2 teams that are trying to strive for that elite level and possibly can with a move. I'm going the other way and look at a team like Orlando, who hasn't performed well here, what is now amounted to almost a year and a half since their regime change down there of the coaches and the executive staff. I mean, currently right now they're sitting in the 14th spot in the playoff race. Last year they finished in the 13th spot. Clearly, this team is not going anywhere. I understand they've had some injuries, but it may be time to break this current crew up. And they've got 2 great assets with which to trade in Nikolai Vucevic and Fournier, both who would have, I think, terrific value on the open market, which would, you know, if they could free up some cap space and go back to the drawing board and rely on perhaps drafting and building that way. They've currently got a pretty good young nucleus. They're going to pay Aaron Gordon. They've got Jonathan Isaac, who early on has shown that he's got some promise. They need a high-level point guard because we all know in this league you're not going to compete for a conference championship or, a championship without a high-level point guard. And the way that they can accomplish that perhaps is through the draft. So maybe they move, 2 very valuable pieces, take a step back. Last thing I'll say, they have a very talented executive staff down there. I mean, you look at John Hammonds, we were just talking about the Greek Freak. He has an excellent track record at drafting. This is not his type team. He wants long, athletic guys that can defend, and spread their wings a little bit. And I think that they just need to go back to the drawing board because it's not happening for them so far.
Interesting, Stu. Let's move on here as we talk trade deadline on Game Time about attaining assets for the future. Which teams have you pinpointed that need to do that?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of teams, Rick, that Orlando's one, obviously, that could prepare for the future. But I'm thinking the Grizzlies and the Clippers. Now, it wasn't too long ago where they had some great playoff battles and went back and forth, physicality, great play. But that window, I think, has closed, it's safe to say, for both franchises. And with the Grizzlies, I mean, look, Mike Conley's been out. They're 6-20 without Mike Conley. Between Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, and Chandler Parsons, they're paying $75 million to those three.
Wow.
And you're obviously out of the picture this year thus far. I just think it's time. I think they don't have an identity. They don't really have a coach. There's a lot of uncertainty. That grit and grind era has passed. And so maybe you move one of those. Obviously, Conley's out. Gasol still can play and has value and has even though he's making a big contract, I think in the right situation could be huge for a ball club. But yeah, at this point, you got to start preparing for the future if you're Memphis. And then on the flip side, the Clippers, I mean, they re-signed Blake Griffin, but losing Chris Paul to me changed things. Patrick Beverley's out. They've been losing games. That guy right there, Lou Williams, is playing great, has tremendous value. There's 24 players in the league who are averaging 20 points a game, and 3 of them are over 30. LeBron James, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Lou Williams. So he's somebody, yes, he's pretty much doing all the scoring right now, but his value is great. You can maybe get some pieces. DeAndre Jordan has a player option next year, has a big contract. Blake Griffin, I think, is a part of your future, and you have a lot of money tied up in him. But maybe you move those two guys and get some young studs that can help you down the road.
Interesting. And in terms of Lou Williams, if you back up a little bit, he was with the Lakers. The Lakers moved him to Houston. And then the Lakers turned that Houston pick into Kyle Kuzma. So, that worked out very, very well for the L.A. Lakers, obviously. And, Stu, let's talk about some teams, other teams that need to attain assets for the future. Who do you have?
Well, you alluded to one just there, and that is the Los Angeles Lakers. And when you talk about assets, generally you go to a place where you think about players. But the biggest asset that Lakers need to attain really is cap space. We know the L.A. Lakers with the new management of Magic Johnson, Rob Pelinka, they're in L.A. It's one of the most attractive franchises in the association. We know that. It's a destination place for many players. What they need to acquire is $60 million, $65 million in cap space. Currently, they're sitting at about $47.5 million. So you say, how do they get there? Well, the way they get there after the season, or, at some point, is they've got to announce a slew of guys, whether it's Bogut, whether it's KCP, whether it's Brook Lopez, and waive some other guys. And then they need to move at some point, either at the deadline or later, Jordan Clarkson. It's unfortunate, terrific talent, but he's a talent in the eyes of the league. He has great value. You take his $12.5 million salary, add it on to the $47.5, and you almost get to $60 million. What's $60 million get you? 2 max contracts.
Who? Give me names.
Maybe DeMarcus Cousins, Paul George, both who would have max contracts starting at $30 million. Sounds like a perfect combination.
Every time I do
Stu's good with his math over there.
He is.
He's got all the numbers figured out.
Every time I do radio in L.A., they bring up one thing, the purple and gold and LBJ, every single time.
Yeah. Well, if they want to sign LBJ now, they can only take one of those 2 guys at $30 million. LBJ's max contract will start at about $35, so they need to get $65 million in cap room. So they got a little bit more ways to go.
Interesting. All right, let's talk about some teams that just need to pump the brakes and wait and see how the next month plays out and then maybe make a decision. Who's that team for you?
I think there are a lot of teams, but I kind of have to go with Indiana. The Pacers, they trade Paul George. You think they're going through a rebuild. I would think they thought they were going through a rebuild, and then they kind of surprised everyone this year. Victor Oladipo, is playing like an all-star, probably should be, will be an all-star this season. They got off to a good start. They're in the playoff picture right now, 19-19, the 8th spot. They've lost 5 in a row, but you don't really know if they're for real. And what I'm reminded of is a few years ago, 2013, 2014, the Phoenix Suns went through something similar. They were rebuilding, and all of a sudden, Goran Dragic had a great season. Bledsoe was hurt. and they went for it, and they didn't make the playoffs, and they weren't good enough, and it kind of ruined their rebuilding process. So, you still have some time to sort of figure out what you're doing. Are you trying to really go for it? You're going to rebuild? But I just think, where they are, I'm not entirely sure. I like this team. I like the young nucleus, but are they for real? And are you still trying to acquire pieces that will complement down the road of Victor Oladipo and Sabonis, or are you trying to go for it right now? And I think you just pump the brakes, wait a little bit, and to see how things, play out here the next few weeks.
Stu, who you got?
I'm going to go with Portland as a wait and see what happens here over the next month. I mean, they're another franchise right now where they had such promise a season and a half ago. Right now are treading water. And now you're in a situation where you've got a guy like C.J. McCollum, again, someone who would have great value on the open market, but isn't performing at the same efficiency as he has, over the past couple of years. Maybe it's time for him to move. The real strength you have in Portland, you have a very good young front court. When you talk about a guy like Nurkic or, Swarnigan and Zach Collins, the rookie that they just drafted, and you've got Damian Lillard. Great starting point, but you need to get better on the wings.